Abandoned sites are some of the saddest places in the world, and it doesn't get much sadder than an abandoned amusement park. Littered with discarded rides, and the screams that once accompanied them have been permanently silenced. You can look up and see the skeletal remains of the Big Dipper or the laughing clowns that now just stare into space. These huge complexes are a reminder of huge dreams and human folly. The following are 7 amusement parks that were opened with huge fanfare only to end up as ghost towns. Number 7. Nara Dreamland, Japan. The Nara Dreamland Park opened in Japan in 1961 to lift people's spirits, and was also a time of booming post-war economy. The park was originally known as Japanese Disneyland before Disneyland actually opened up in Tokyo. It was advertised as a bedtime fantasy and made of garish steel. While Nara Dreamland had the usual amusement rides and roller coasters, the designs was what really set it apart from the rest. The entrance to the park featured a huge rendition of Sleeping Beauty's castle. Main Street USA stretched through the centre of the park, giving the Asian Pacific nation a taste of the West they had never seen before. Nara was a favourite holiday destination for over 40 years, before finally closing down in 2006. The masses then moved on to the real Disneyland in Tokyo, and Nara couldn't afford to compete. Since then, the park has been deserted and left to rust. Although everything still works electronically, and the grounds are still patrolled by guards, unfortunately it is now beyond the point of repair. Vegetation has started to appear in the abandoned roller coaster tracks, and the plastic mascots lurk in the darkened doorways, their once happy smiles having rotted away to spooky leers. Number 6. Duddy Park in Belgium. Situated on the outskirts of picturesque Duddizeel in Flanders, there was a time that Duddy Park was a prime attraction in the area, with humble beginnings as a playground in the 1950s watched over by a local priest. The park expanded over the years until it became a full amusement park complete with rides, slides and fun mascots. The popularity of the park came to a gruesome end during the early 2000s, where it's alleged a child visiting the park had their arm ripped off by one of the rides, which was the last string in a series of incidents and accidents that sent the park into a death spiral. In 2002, the park was closed to the public, becoming an abandoned wasteland and then vandalised by graffiti. Left idle for a decade, the abandoned Duddy Park was finally demolished in 2012. Over the course of the next 2 years, the rides would be taken down, the slides pulled apart, and empty-eyed mascots crushed into dust. Today, the former amusement park plays host to a hiking spot, and the rides turned into scrap. Number 5. Spree Park, Berlin, Germany. Originally created in East Germany for citizens of the communist GDR to enjoy, Spree Park in Berlin found its footing after the Berlin Wall came down and the country was unified. With the guidance of Norbert Witt, Spree Park expanded both in terms of ambition and scope. New rides were added, including a giant Ferris wheel, and the park was populated with dinosaurs. Things changed when Witt suddenly abandoned Spree Park in 2002 and fled to Peru. All that was left was a legacy in tatters and a mountain of dead. Spree Park became abandoned. Swan boats floated aimlessly on the lake, and the rides were cracked and broken down, and the dinosaurs had been left to lay on the ground. It was not known what would happen to the park, but there was very little chance that it would one day recover and reopen. However, there is a twist to the story. Witt was arrested in Peru in 2004 for attempting to smuggle cocaine back to his home country, Germany. He'd hoped to open up another theme park, this one in South America, and begin a new life. Those plans disappeared pretty quickly upon his arrest. Whip was sentenced to 7 years in jail. A few years later, in August 2014, a fire tore through most of the abandoned theme park. Number 4. Wonderland Amusement Park, China. Wonderland Amusement Park is found along the outskirts of Beijing and was once considered to be a potential rival to Disneyland. However, Wonderland was never completed, and all that remains is a hollow skeleton of broken promises and failed expectations. The reason that the park was abandoned was due to bureaucratic contract disputes. Initially, the plans received millions of dollars in funding, but when a few problems started to appear, everyone cut their losses and made for the hills. Instead of completing the job and building the park, the people behind the project left it to rot and just abandoned it. The green areas were taken back by farmers, and the unfinished castles were claimed by squatters looking for a place to sleep. The bulldozers came in 2013, and the dream of Disneyland in China was brushed aside and left to history. Number 3. Chippewa Lake Park, Ohio, USA. When the park opened up in 1875, no one expected Chippewa Lake Park to last as long as it did. Originally called Andrews Pleasure Grounds, the park became infamous for the drunken and loutish behaviour of guests. There was a hand-powered roller coaster that would have to be pulled back to the top by attendants each time. There was also a general lack of health and safety, and it's amazing that the park survived at all. Not only did the park survive, but it managed to thrive and blossom. The park was acquired by the Beach family in 1896, and they immediately banned both drinking and the sale of alcohol on the premises of the park. They brought in music to the park, built new mechanical rides, and transformed the dull pleasure gardens into a real theme park. The park stayed open for nearly 100 years, but the good times were not to last. Chippewa shut their doors for the final time in 1976, having been priced out by the competition from the bigger, better and newer parks opening up in Ohio. By the time the wrecking crews arrived, Chippewa Lake Park had become overgrown and looked like an abandoned concrete playground in a forest. Number 2. Camelot, Lancashire, UK. Camelot Theme Park was based on the legend of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, where the Kingdom of Camelot is part of English folklore. Sadly, the theme park based on the idea of Camelot wasn't able to stand the test of time. Opened to great aplomb in 1983, the park closed down after only 30 years due to visitor apathy and financial problems. The park's skyline now showed massive rides that had been left to rust. The blank-faced mannequins stared out from the sludge, and the ghost train remained silent. When some of the best rides were sold off to other parks in the UK, Camelot became empty and barren. There are no plans to ever reopen the park, and it now awaits demolition. Number 1. Sports World, Izunagaoka, Japan. Izunagaoka Sports World was doomed from the start, having been built just before the Japanese economic bubble burst. A mostly water-based theme park built into the crown of the Izu Peninsula, it was designed to have everything a family on vacation could possibly want. There was an expensive restaurant, a smart hotel, a spa, a wave pool, a gym, and lots of rides. Then the economic bubble exploded with a bang in 1990, and suddenly it was all over. Sports World went under within just 3 years. The company behind the park closed their doors and the park sank into disrepair. The jungle that the park was built upon had reclaimed it. The residential villas had fallen into disrepair, and the slides were now covered in green mould. The sparkling pools had been replaced by sludge pits, and the complex was finally put out of its misery in 2011.